I think it's really important in pools. You're not always prioritizing players, you're prioritizing teams. So we're going to talk about some teams that I think we should be targeting.
All right, well, let's start off with a very obvious one, considering they have two of the best players in the world, and that is the Edmonton Oilers.
Yes, the Edmonton Oilers proved last year in the playoffs that they don't even have to go that far to carry you in a playoff pool. We saw what Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl did. They played 2 rounds and then 4 games of the third round, and they were absolutely dominant. You could see Connor McDavid almost win a Conn Smythe trophy if he gets to deeper into a third round series. Doesn't even necessarily make the final. That's how many points he's going to get. So in my opinion, for that reason alone, you should be loading up on Edmonton Oilers, not just, of course, McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. We're talking Zach Hyman, Evander Kane. The list goes on and on. You can go deeper down the lineup. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Get as many as you can, especially because the Pacific Division bracket is not too scary. It's still the weakest in the NHL, in my opinion. So it's not inconceivable that the Oilers emerge from that bracket again and make it to the Western Conference Final for a second year in a row. So to me, I think there are years where, the best players in fantasy aren't necessarily the top picks in playoff pools. I don't think that's the case this time. I think McDavid and Leon Draisaitl should be the top 2 picks.
All right. The team that beat them last year to make it to the Stanley Cup final, and obviously they won it, the Colorado Avalanche. A bit of a different situation this year. They're not as strong as they were a year ago, but they're still the Colorado Avalanche.
That's right. The Avalanche seem to be peaking late. Obviously, we have to keep a very close eye on Cale Makar's injury status, but they're slowly getting healthy-ish in time for the playoffs. Suddenly, they're looking like they could win the Central Division, which could obviously get them an easier opponent in the first round of the playoffs as well, which is very important. And I still think the Avs, just talent-wise, if they're relatively healthy or even 90% healthy, have as good a shot as anyone to go all the way to the final again. We've seen, of course, obviously the superstars Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen having great years again, both over 100 points. But if you're looking at even depth additions, obviously Arturi Lehkonen, guys like that were really good in the playoffs last year. You can always consider Gabriel Landeskog a sleeper if he's going to be back in the lineup, dropped in there just in time for the playoffs. So the Avs, of course, a team to target in your playoff pool.
All right. The Dallas Stars is a team we've talked about a lot on this show this year because they got a good young core and they look like a team on the upswing. So Dallas Stars.
That's right. So the Dallas Stars, to me, I'm barring anything crazy happening in the next week, I'm probably going to pick them to reach the Stanley Cup final to represent the Western Conference. I just think they have all the ingredients, especially the 3-pillar system. You have the superstar goalie and Jake Ottinger, the elite defenseman and Miro Heiskanen, the superstar forward and Jason Robertson. Based on that sort of team structure, I think a lot of Stanley Cup champions are built the same way. I think they have what it takes to go all the way. So I would be targeting Stars, whether it's that entire top line with Jason Robertson, also Roope Hintz, Joe Pavelski, even the depth second line guys like Jamie Benn, who's had a great year, Miro Heiskanen, and I think Jake Ottinger, you can make a case, is as good a pick as any goalie in net for the fantasy playoffs.
All right, and this one's an obvious one for obvious reasons, the Boston Bruins.
Yes, we don't have to overthink this one. Yes, it's possible that the Bruins choke. We've seen when teams have set or tied the wins record in the past, they did not win the Stanley Cup. But I just think this Boston Bruins team is not built that way. They have some Stanley Cup winners on the roster that aren't going to be mentally soft and choke it away. 2018-19 Lightning did before the Cup experience. So to me, the Bruins, at minimum, they're going to win a round. They're probably going to win more than one round. They are statistically the most dominant regular season team ever, and they're sneaky deep. When you have guys like Taylor Hall possibly on the third line for the playoffs, this is a deep team. So I think it's a decent strategy to really load up on Bruins, go deep down that lineup, and add guys, of course, Linus Ullmark. I think if I'm going to do some rankings, which I will, I think Ullmark, just based on the Bruins record, is probably going to have to be the number 1 ranked fantasy goalie for the playoffs.
And then there's the New York Rangers, the team that when they drafted Lafreniere, I tweeted out that they'd win the 2024 Stanley Cup. So that's next year. And, Lafreniere, I expect to be a bit better, but this is a year that we still expect them to do quite well.
Yeah, the New York Rangers were my preseason pick to win the Stanley Cup. I just think they have such an elite collection of high-end talent, and I think that's very fantasy-friendly, whether it's Adam Fox, Igor Shesterkin, or Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad, the list goes on and on. So I do think if you're confident in the Rangers, then you could have a strategy to load up on them. I think they're still a little bit flawed. They're not a perfect team. Defensively, they have their moments. But I do think they're a team, because they have so much high-end talent, that they could make it 1 or 2 rounds and still accrue a lot of fantasy value. I wouldn't necessarily be loading up on every single Ranger the way I might do it with Boston or Colorado or Edmonton, but I think it would be wise to have a couple Rangers on your roster.